In this module, we're going to discuss how we can leverage events from within our environment. Before we go too far, let's discuss what is considered an event within Azure. Per Microsoft site, an event is the smallest amount of information that fully describes something that happened in the system. They go on to say that it includes some specific information for each event type. So if you added a file to a storage account, it might include the path to the file, the size of the file, as well as the storage account's name. There are 3 different features in Azure that we're going to look at to handle these events. The first is Event Grid. This is going to be used for event-driven automation. Events are submitted, and then another resource can review and act based upon the information of that event. The next is Event Hub. This is used to ingest events and can store them and stream them to another service. Say if you're using a third-party SIEM tool and want to get the data from Azure to that tool. And then finally, Notification Hub. This is useful if you want to push information to one or more devices quickly, typically mobile devices. I tend to relate this to a severe weather alerts on our mobile phone. If there's a severe storm coming in, often many people in the affected area get a notification about the storm so that they can stay safe. This will be using Notification Hub to facilitate this. Event Grid is useful for applications that use event-based architecture. In event-based architecture, the resource that is generating the event doesn't care about who is receiving that event. Since it is decoupled, it makes things easier to manage as you don't have to worry about writing back to the source. Event Grid is utilized to collect information from the various event sources and then pass them along to the event handlers. The event source could be a variety of Azure resources, like storage, resource groups, or container registry. So as the events are generated from these resources, Event Grid will receive the events. Depending on how Event Grid is configured, you can take those events and then pass them along to another service that will respond or react to those events. You can use logic apps or functions to perform an action, or you can send it to a storage queue to be processed later. The advantage of this approach, again, is that everything is segmented and decoupled, thus giving you the ability to define your process flow in a granular approach, which allows it to scale with ease. Now that we understand the concept of Event Grid, let's take a moment to review some of the terminology associated with it. An event is a small subset of information that defines something that happened. It doesn't contain the raw data of the event, only the metadata to describe it. Using a storage account example again, the event doesn't contain a file, it only describes the file. Publishers are the user or organization that sends the event to Event Grid. Microsoft is an example of a publisher. If you are sending an event to Event Grid from an on-premises location, then your organization would be the publisher. Event sources are the resources generating the events. For example, Azure Storage, container registries, key vaults, so on and so forth. If your application is sending an event to Event Grids, then your application would be considered the event source. Continuing on, topics are how you define to the event source where to send its events. They're used to collect related events within Event Grid. An event source can select one or more topics to send to events depending on how the topics overlap and the type of events it generated. There are 3 general topic types. The first is system topics, and these are used for built-in Azure services. Custom topics are used for applications or third-party topics. And there's a subset of third-party topics called partner topics, and these are ones that have basically worked with Azure and met various requirements to be considered a partner topic over a custom topic. Once the event is sent to a topic, then a subscription is used to filter the events. This gives you the ability to remove the noise and only receive events that are actionable. Finally, after we've gone through all this work of ingesting the events and filtering them, we now have the event handlers to process the events. This is where we can act based on the events received. These can include webhooks, storage queues, or Azure functions. In summary, Event Grid takes the information in, can filter it, and then pass it along to a handler so that it can be processed. Let's jump in the portal, create an Event Grid, and see how they work in action. Here we are back in the Azure portal. And what we're going to do for this demonstration is we're going to create an Event Grid topic so we can send data to Event Grid. We're then also going to create a subscription in it that's going to send information to an Azure storage queue so that we can view that information. So let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is we need to create an Event Grid topic. If we go up here and search at the top, we can start typing event. You can see we've got event hubs and then a number of options for Event Grid. Our goal today is going to be a topic. So let's go ahead and select that. You can see that we don't have one here today, so let's go ahead and select Add, and then we've got our ever popular screen. So let's go ahead and we're going to put this in our Skylines resource group. We're going to give it a name. We're just going to call it Skylines EG topic, if I can spell. We're going to leave that in the default location of East US, And then we have the option to where we can choose the schema for the events that are going to be sent to this topic. We're going to leave that as a default, but you can see we do have a couple different options there. We're not going to assign a manage identity or define any tags at this point. So let's go ahead and hit create, and this will go ahead and get our topic set up. And this shouldn't take too long. Perfect. Our topic's ready, so let's go ahead and open that resource up. You can see here we've got our access keys as well as our networking options. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and create our subscription. So let's go ahead and add event subscription, and we need to give it a name, and we'll just call this Skylines EG subscription for subscription. We're going to leave the default schema, and if we wanted to, we could filter out some events types. So if we wanted to put some filter in there, we could do that. We're just going to leave ours as a default. And now we need to go through and select the endpoint type for the subscription. And for that, we're going to go ahead and select a storage queue. But you can see we can talk to an Azure function, a webhook, or send something to a service bus topic or queue, which we will talk about very soon. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and select storage queues. And now we need to select the specific queue. So let's go ahead and select that. It's going to be in the subscription, and it's going to be in the Skylines demo storage account. So select that. And then we've got a storage queue called Event Grid. So perfect. So all that's set up, let's go ahead and confirm this selection, and let's go ahead and create. So essentially what we've done to this point is we've created a topic. So we've got a location where we can send our events. That topic is then going to pass that information along to the subscription. The subscription in this case is our Event Grid storage queue. This is great. However, how does it really work, or how do we test that? Well, what we can do is I've got a Cloud Shell window open here, and we've got a few commands. So if we go through and take a look at these commands in Visual Studio Code, the first one is basically getting the endpoint. The first command, AZ Event Grid Topic Show, is going to look for that Skylines EG topic in the Skylines resource group, and it's basically going to look for the endpoint of that topic. It's going to save that as the endpoint variable. And then we're basically going to do the same thing again, except this time we're going to get the key, or those access key, for that event grid. And then from there, we've just got a few events that we're creating. So just some information, and we'll take a look at that once we get that in the storage queue. Lines 9 through 10 are then taking the events that we created, 1, 2, and 3, and then sending them to that topic. The topic will then take those and pass them along to the storage queue. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and copy these commands here. And if we go back to the Cloud Shell, and if I paste those in, it'll go through and run. And if we just do endpoint, oh, it's yelling at me. So let's try this in a little cleaner format. So we do echo endpoint, and we can see the URL that the topic will be listening on. If we do echo key, we can now see the access key that it's going to be using. And if we go back to our topic, look at access keys, and then show key 1, we can see that that matches with what we have in the Cloud Shell. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and run a clear here real quick. And now let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's copy those 3 curl commands. And let's go back and run those. So it looks like everything completed successfully. Let's go take a look at that storage queue to validate those messages are there. So we go back to the portal, let's go home. We've already got the storage account listed here under recent resources, so we'll select that. We'll scroll down to our queues, and then we've got our event grid queue. We'll open that up, and there we can see our 3 messages. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one, and we can see basically we're passing along some information, talking about a Triumph Street Trample. Cool. All right, let's take a look at the second one. Close this, and let's take a look at our second one here. And this one is talking about a KTM Super Duke. Guy's got good taste. And then we'll look at the third one here, and it's another Triumph Thruxton this time. So again, basically what we're showing here is that we've got a event grid that we're sending information to. It's then passing it along to a storage queue to be processed. This is just one example. Again, we can use a Azure function or a webhook to go ahead and take that information and process it. Hopefully this helped explains the concept behind event grids and how you can configure them. Let's jump back into PowerPoint and take a look at another event-based tool.